TGI, the global island. The F word. Yeah, we went there. European nude beaches? What's the Overton window? We were really confused about cultural hegemony, so we fired Matt and hired ChatGPT. Is it Iran or Iran? England is the bad guy throughout history? David Graeber and Dave Ramsey? What do they have to say on debt? You know, speaking about debt, why don't we just cancel all of debt? Wait, the Jews already tried that in the Old Testament. Jubilee. And we end on consumer neuroscience. The F word, brother.
It's like a way of expressing yourself in New York. You know, I mean, there was that meme going around where it was like the professor talking like to a kid from Brooklyn, and he's discussing like England and the Falkland Islands down in South America. And the joke is that the kid from Brooklyn's like, "What fucking islands are you talking about? There's fucking islands over here," you know? 'Cause it's just like how you use the cursing. Like,
sure.
Dude, I have this one coworker, and like, you would never think that interior design and retail, there would be so much cursing.
Really?
Oh, yeah. But again, it's just Long Island native. Just
okay,
Long Island.
yeah.
She fucking curses during everything.
Sure.
See? Exactly like that. It just like slides right in, and there's absolutely nothing to it.
I want to know your history with curse words in general. What do you think about them? Because I feel like I have changed my mind on it so dramatically throughout my life.
So when I was young, I learned the word cunt from watching a lot of British television. And listen here, you cunt. Like,
oh, this episode is hella explicit. Had your wife, had your kids, and we're not trying to be douchebaggy. We're actually having a genuine conversation about curse words.
I tried to I was like, I'm gonna be cringy as fuck. I'm gonna say cunt. Oh, you're such a cunt. That's a cunt. Why are you a cunt?
It's pronounced cunt.
Kunt. Yeah, sure.
No, I'm joking.
No, but like in British culture, it's such a common word, and it's not necessarily a bad word. But over here, it's like, no, oh my God, don't. Like, it like breaks my mom's heart when she hears the word cunt.
Yeah.
So like, she literally could not even listen to me saying this because it would just bother her. And I think that, like, I was a little bit of an edgy asshole when I was a kid.
Has your opinion on curse words, like, changed throughout your life?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, I try to make a point not to use them, especially now, like, in the social work field. Like, you really don't want to.
Sure.
You need to be professional.
Sure.
And it sometimes it turns into a bad habit where it's not even intended. Like, there's no negative intention behind it. Like, when I'm with certain coworkers or whatnot, it's like just shooting the shit back and forth.
Sure.
But there's nothing bad meant by it. Like, I try not to curse at things in a negative connotation.
So
you know
intention
what I mean?
is really
yeah,
important.
exactly. Yeah. I really try to not do that intention anymore.
But you brought up an amazing point, and this was something that one of my coworkers was like, yeah, I'm really trying to stop cursing. And I thought about it. I'm like, you know, I don't think people want to stop cursing. It's the reason why people just say that is that they want to feel like they have control over the words that's coming out of their mouth, more so.
Well, also, it's kind of like that idea, like, I don't want to bring that kind of negativity. Like, it's an unnecessary negativity.
And people can make assumptions about you based off of your
it's
verbal
like,
abilities.
I'm not that negative of a person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just because...
Okay, but this is why I would love to see, like, a sociological perspective from your understanding of it. It bogs me because, like, words are awesome because words have agreed upon meaning, right? And then, like, the fact that we just have this, like, weird class of words that we deem as curse words, it feels so unnatural because to me, it's like in different contexts, you use different words, right? And we all know this, right? There's a certain way that you talk in the classroom that you don't talk to your friends, right? And that doesn't even involve cursing or not cursing. It's just a different way of tonality, the different types of ways that you put your sentences together, right? But then we have this, like, weird set of, like, do not say words or people use them when, like, they're really angry. But once again, words are just words, and we all agree upon what they mean and what they don't mean, and it seems like we're putting so much emphasis on these things and making, like, personality distinctions based off of it. I don't know. I think culture goes a little bit too mad when it comes to curse words.
Well, I think it depends on the culture because, again, like I said, England doesn't care about the word cunt. I mean,
bloody hell.
You know, you'll see curse words in the news, and you'll see nudity in the newspaper in England, and in the United States, that's just completely not accepted.
Sure.
You know, so
we're also a much heavier, you know, Christian conservative nation.
True. We don't have that
also more
Protestant.
sexually repressed in America. than a lot of European countries.
I feel like sexuality is very weird here, like...
Yeah, in some settings we're hella repressed, and in other settings we're like, yo, let's just go for it.
I find there's no in between. You know what I mean? I find people are either out there dressed in like leather, full dominatrix in the street at their parade, or it's like, no, like...
Purity matters.
Yeah, it's so difficult. And then... because we have
God bless the Christians, I love it.
We have this like dualism back and forth on it. Sex still sells in fashion, in advertisements, you know what I mean? But it's not seen in this sort of like artistic sense, and it's like not so like widely shared. Like when I was in the south of France, like there were just girls walking around with their tops off at the beach.
Sure.
Nobody's staring at them. Nobody's harassing them.
Sure.
And they're just going about their day and just like, it's like one of those things where I notice, I'm like, wow, like I wish we sort of had that sort of humanistic connection where we're like, this is the way we exist. This is not a sexual scenario. It's not like in Pakistan where if a woman's not completely covered up, where she has 500 men completely surrounding her, so it's, I definitely think it's the taste within society. Like, there's a way to look at it through, like, you could argue cultural hegemony. Like,
what's that?
Cultural hegemony was this idea from this Italian Marxist, neo-Marxist philosopher, Gramsci, Gramsci. I'm half Italian and I can't even say it. Cultural hegemony is this idea that within our culture and society, there is what's agreed upon. Like, you could almost look at it as like the generalized other in sociology, that there are these ideas that are
norms.
Sort of. It's almost looking at norms as if
they were cultural ideas.
Yeah, and that there is a hierarchy within the culture of what imposes itself on everything else.
Have you heard of the Overton window?
Explain.
Okay, so this is like a political science concept. The Overton window is like, what are the topics that we can talk about publicly? And then, like, if we start talking about how the CIA actually has access to alien bio weapons, that's not in the Overton window. Fox News and CNN, we can't talk about this because this is conspiracy land. What's the difference?
Well, I mean, I guess you could say, like, within the cultural, like, taste of society, I guess taste is probably a better way to look at this.
What their preferences? Cultural preferences?
Sort of what we allow to exist, what we allow to speak upon. Like,
okay.
You know what I mean?
Besides the things that we feel that are so disgusting or like repulsive that we just don't even bring them up or conversate about.
Well, I mean, in some fields we do. I mean, like, if you think of, like, gore films, for example, Terrifier 3 just came out. This is not a plug for it, but it's just a blatantly gore fest
Unless
of a
they
film.
Want to pay us.
I'm all in. I mean, Art the Clown, I don't know if you've seen it, man.
Bro, I don't watch any scary movies. Okay, I watch optimistic, happy movies because that's what I want to fill my brain with.
Let me put it to you in perspective. In the first movie, there's this one kill scene, right? Where he captures this one girl, and he's got her friend. The friend is strapped into a chair, like into like this torture chair, and Art the Clown is this just killer, and he pulls across a curtain, and there's the friend. I'm pretty sure she's fully naked, hanging upside down, like arms and legs sprawled out, and he just starts sawing her from groin to head and making the friend watch. Like, that's the kind of movie, and this movie has such a cult following, so it's like, you're right, it's like, it's funny, we would not speak about this like in general populations between people, but these subgenres such as horror and gore films, there is a niche
people that are very like cultish towards it.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Like, it's funny because,
but that doesn't represent, like, I would say that that's a subculture. That's not American culture. Okay, I'm still confused what hegemony is.
Well,
look it up, brother. Look it up.
You know what it is, man? It's been a long day.
Humble thyself.
It's been a really long day.
Humble thyself to that mighty power of Google or ChatGPT.
The first place that I learned about hegemony was in was it Western Civ 1. It was explained through like empires essentially. But cultural hegemony is the dominance within a society by the ruling class that shape the culture of that society.
There's one ruling class that has like a monopoly on culture.
Sort of. It's looking at it through a sort of class
Bro, get that ChatGPT out here, bro.
It's not a simplistic thing to discuss, and I almost don't.
Bro, ChatGPT makes everything simplistic. Hold on.
Are you gonna interview? Are you just gonna talk to ChatGPT?
Yeah, Matt, you're fired.
I'm fired.
I'm joking.
No, that's all right. I mean, the way that I look at it is
Hold
through
on. What is cultural hegemony?
Cultural hegemony is a concept developed by the Italian Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci.
Oh, you were
It
close.
refers to the way a dominant group in society can control and shape the cultural norms, values, and beliefs of the broader population.
Okay.
Instead of relying on force, the ruling class exerts its power by getting people to accept and
Because they have
internalize its
influence.
worldview as the norm, making it seem natural or common sense. This allows the dominant group to maintain power and control. Because
So like, if, for example, there's literally like 3 media companies that are the parent companies of all the media in America, right? So it's like, because there's like a small ruling class that has all the influence power per se, when it comes to like mainstream media, there's this Overton window of what is discussed and what isn't, and they can kind of influence based off of that.
Here's a great example on this. The DEI industry, right? If we look at nonprofits and why they have these DEI initiatives and these committees within this company, nonprofits operate by obtaining their funding from funders. Those funders can be state government, local government, federal government, private equity, or just general donors.
Sure.
Now, when you're looking at private equity and state government, federal government, for examples, they will set the parameters on what it is and how you can reach these fundings. So essentially, the way that I'm understanding, in part, this is not obviously all of DEI, but the way that I'm understanding that they can exert this sort of idea or way of thinking on all of these companies is financially tie them to it. So now they have an incentive to gain financial backing because they adhere to this.
Because they get a golden star.
State-driven DEI funding. Well, they don't get golden star, they get money. So is it really about diversity?
Well,
you know what I mean? So like this is where the cultural hegemony kind of comes in, is now because of the way in which DEI initiatives are structured and the funding that is backed to them is set by these very high powers within society in that sort of private realm, in the non-profit realm. And, you know, at the governmental level, I could argue you could change it. We are in a democracy, you know. But within a company, you're not going to change their DEI initiatives at all because it's all set seemingly by these outside groups.
Sure. You know? This was... Tell me if I'm too cynical. Maybe I'm consuming too many like CIA.
You're too cynical.
So to me, the smartest people in the world that have influence, and they're also like a part of like the more like dark triad tendencies, and they work for the intelligence services, even like foreign intelligence services. Like right now, Russia is putting so much money into internet bots that are basically funding like Jewish posts, like pro-Israel posts, and then they're also funding pro-Palestinian posts because they're not starting that division in America, right? They're rather putting more fuel onto the fire because their long-term psyop is to create, you know, civil unrest and more lack of trust in our institutions and in our government. That's like a long-term goal for, you know, China, Russia, and Iran. And so to me, it's like Iran. I'm sorry. Yeah. Iran.
Iran is looked at as the bad guys, but
you ready? The people are actually like, there's so many amazing Iranian people that are like fighting against their, you know, tyranny of their government, and I think the long-term future of Iran is very optimistic if we can, you know, get rid of the dogmatic Islamic fundamentalism.
I mean, part of the reason the government that is, you know, there's movements against the Iranian like government by people that left Iran, but realistically it's the United States' fault why the government is the way it is. That's debatable, but the US did partly caused the situation in Iran by not allowing them to,
I
have
think
their...
an important point is like everyone wants to blame the big person.
Yes.
But the problem is that the big person, because they're big and they have all this influence and they're going to be like the world's police, like the U.S. I think this is like a similar argument where like when everyone studies history, everyone shits on England. And it's like England was like the douchebags of history, and they probably were, right? But I think also just because they had the influence and the power, they're obviously, because they're a part of more decisions than not, then the decisions that went sour, they're obviously going to get the brunt of the blame. And I think America, that's very akin to that because, we created all these coups in other countries that we were policing, and we were trying to, use intelligence operatives to kind of infiltrate countries and try to create democracy around the world. And when some of those kind of programs backfired, we obviously have to take the brunt of the responsibility.
You know what? I'm going to partly agree with you, but I am also going to explain why we should be so critical of the United States and England, for example. So, do you know what the Treaty of Westphalia is?
It sounds familiar, but I don't know.
Treaty of Westphalia essentially was at the end of the 30-year war in Europe. It set the basis for the modern nation state. And really the main takeaway point is state sovereignty. Now, the issue with this now is that, say we have France, Germany, England. All of these are nation states. They all have sovereignty, which means they have their own right to govern their own people, and they should not interfere on the governance of others. Like the French should not interfere on the governance of the Germans. This is where colonialism comes in, and sort of this, where Kant calls it an immoral nature. The Treaty of Westphalia was not applied to the rest of the world by any means. So nobody else had sovereignty besides Europe. At least this is the way that some people think about it.
Yeah.
Now, there's also another alternative, like speaking on historians, it's important to not get too focused on, Europe's racist, so because they're non-European, they're going to, subjugate everybody else. There's also this idea that David Graeber brought up on debt, that a lot of conquest and this expanding conquest and even the slave trade really came from these constant debts that people had, like based on credit. And
they had to pay off the debt by...
Exactly. And so like Cortez, for example, was somebody that took out so much credit. Even though Cortez conquered Mexico, he had to constantly conquer because he was constantly taking out credit and constantly accumulating debt. And I believe he had to go back to Spain at one point because he was so poor. He was so indebted, and he kept conquering. And this is actually something that's similar with the slave trades. The African towns that were on the ocean were started to become based upon like the classical credit systems that they had. They started to become indebted, so then they started taking other people's They started taking people as slaves and then selling those slaves. Like it's interesting when you break your understanding on history and you clear it. So that, like, this is what Karl Popper means when it's like, not everything is just racism. Let's look at it from another perspective, and we can find something else.
That's why David has really great takes on this stuff.
Oh, he does. But that's where
the economic debt thing is wild because, I mean, right now, look at American debt is... Yeah. Okay, so hold on.
I know I kind of swung that topic there.
No. Europe this is a fun one though. Yeah. So could we say that like the real racist, the real assholes of history are the financial industry?
Okay, so great. Here's a great example. There's this
Goldman
idea
Sachs,
in both.
Goldman Sachs, we're coming for your.
Well, actually, you know what? The IMF is one of the most evil organizations on the planet.
What is the IMF?
The International Monetary Fund. It was the IMF and the World Bank were created following the end of World War II.
You don't like any of the data from the World Bank? You don't trust it?
No, it's not that I don't trust the World Bank and the IMF are two different organizations.
Sure.
The IMF is the one that gives out loans and hands out structural adjustment programs. In other words, say Niger wants a loan from the IMF because they're indebted because they had a previous dictator that took all their money to Paris. And, again, nobody in Paris was, or Switzerland was saying anything about this. They just were happy to take the millions of dollars, and this dictator took it from Niger. But now let's say, hypothetically, Niger has a democratic elected government, and this government's trying to fix the problems that the past corrupt dictator left. They would go to the IMF and say, we need a loan, we want to structure our programs right now. So because we only look at debt in the sense that David Graeber breaks it down as a moral issue, and he brings it up like historically, both in Christianity and Buddhism, that a debtor, somebody that lends money, a creditor, technically is immoral. And so is the person that takes out debt is also technically immoral. But the IMF, where it is really immoral, is it imposes structural adjustment programs on these countries. Now, this is real neocolonialism. So let's say Niger has school programs, and they want every kid to go K through 12, and they are funding their lunches. The IMF will come in and say, we're going to give you $5 billion, but guess what? You're cutting all your lunch programs. And they often always go after social services first, which is contradictory to Africa's like core being, because they are a very historically communal continent. Sure. Like they're very similar to Japanese or Native Americans, that idea, that community. They're not entirely individualistic as we are in the West. Yeah. So that's where this idea of like now Western cultural hegemony is now being imposed on African nations through the IMF.
Fundamentally, throughout all of human history, those that have resources, and now that's, those who control the banks, those who control the money supply, you have the influence, right? If a world is based off of that, and if value is transferred via wealth, then you, the person who, or the groups of people who run that, you fundamentally are the most powerful people in the world.
I think this was more enshrined following the Marshall Plan and the current monetary system of the globe, where essentially our money is based on debt. Essentially, it's so much to explain. Seriously, David. I was listening. David Graeber has this 2-hour long history just
on debt.
Yeah,
and I gotta check this out. Do you know who Dave Ramsey is?
No, I don't.
He's a Christian financial expert.
Okay.
Really great stuff. The thing that makes him unique is he is anti-debt. So he doesn't have any credit cards his whole life. Doesn't believe in taking out car loans, any of this. His parents were in the real estate business, and so he got his real estate license, and he knows how to use mortgages. But besides that, no debt. And he talks about how, oh shoot, this is actually my that's so funny. Every 11 a.m. and 8 p.m. I do my 4-7-8 breathing. You breathe in your nose for 4 seconds.
Yeah, I got
7 seconds you hold it, and then take it. So I'll have to do that right after this. But Dave Ramsey is just really countercultural in that sense. People call in and people are like, yeah, so I got $100,000 in student loan debt. I got my Mercedes-Benz 20, and he's like, and how much money do you make? And the guy's like, I make $60,000. And then he's like, listen, brother, it's great, but it shows us that we are all okay. This is the point that I want to make. Okay, I got it. So Dave Ramsey talks about how people always say, well, I need a good credit score, right? Where the fuck did this concept even come from, right? 200 years ago, motherfuckers didn't have a credit score, and you could still move in the world, right? The financial industries created this whole concept of a credit score. And the crazy thing is, Dave Ramsey talks about how you actually don't need one technically. How you can actually get a car, you can get a mortgage, and what they do is instead of looking into your credit history, they can look into your other financial histories, and there's all these the back ends that historically were the ways that we would actually measure whether a person was able to receive a loan from the bank. And now the whole financial industry has created this whole narrative around a credit score. Why? To get people on a credit card early, to get people using. And now I had multiple credit cards, and I've never paid 1 penny in interest in my whole life, and I never will. I treat my credit card like it's a debit card, and I've I probably made around $2,000 off of credit cards in the last like maybe 4 years. And I'm grateful for that. At the same time, I do realize that I am probably spending more money than I would if I didn't have credit cards. And there's, other psychological things that makes it more cognitively taxing. So I don't know if I fully agree with Dave Ramsey's point, but it does bring up kind of to be a little bit more skeptical, like in regards to how Kanye West, to drag him in here, he goes, who the hell invented the sidewalk? And it's like, yeah, nobody thinks about that because it just blends in. When there's so many things in our life and in our culture that we just assume is life, and we're just so focused into our time period that we need to kind of be a little bit more wider.
It's also the taste on our time period a bit. So we think of it as an immoral thing to not pay our debts, correct? Like if you said, oh, that person didn't pay his debt, the general implicit bias of society would be like,
do you think it's not immoral?
Well, I mean, let me explain.
Okay, so if there is immoral debt, you believe that you shouldn't have to pay it.
Well, so historically, there was this thing called, in Judaism, called the Jubilee. Graeber...
This is like every 700 years or like 70
I believe it was
years?
every 50 years. They essentially did debt cancellations periodically.
Yeah, the Old Testament, baby. But they also had the bond servitude, which is like basically like slavery, where instead of paying off your debt, you would basically you'd like sell your own labor and say, hey, I'll work for you for 10 years.
Well, those were indentured servants.
Yeah,
what you're thinking servitude. Of, because that's where somebody. So this is.
But I'm sorry, go back to the Jubilee concept.
So the Jubilee concept. Actually, there was this economic group in Boston. It may have been Jeffrey Sachs's organization. I'm not sure because Sachs is involved with so many things. And they ran this model of what happens if we canceled people's debts. Yeah. Not debts between corporations and banks, just people's debts.
People's debts towards the bank?
Overall people's debts. Okay. I don't know the exact details on individual debts. Sure. Exactly. So if I take out, my graduate school loans are probably going to be $34,000, for example, and say I owe $5,000 left on my car. Yeah. Say overall I owe, I don't know, add in miscellaneous, say I owe $40,000 in debt. Essentially, that it would just cancel it out. They found that it was bad. But it was not as bad as if we just kept letting debt continue to grow and as it does. Yeah, exactly.
Because there's probably a huge kind of physical capital labor cost to that, because then people aren't as productive. They don't, and the entrepreneurial people don't have the resources to actually make the products that increase GDP and lower the cost of goods and services.
Okay, so here was a great example that Graeber brought up that I was like, holy crap. Yeah. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, right? And all the banks were buying up all the mortgages and they failed, right? Yeah. This is in part government's fault and also greedy financials. Yeah, it's a combination of things going on. We bailed out the banks, but everybody that had these bad mortgages got kicked out of their homes. Graeber brings up the idea of what if instead of just giving the banks these massive checks, we bailed out everyone with a mortgage? Yeah. Then the banks would be paid anyway, and the banks would still exist, and the system would still go on. So from my understanding...
But they wouldn't... But the banks wouldn't get the amount of money that they were looking in the short term. They would get it in the long term.
Well, the banks failed because everybody was defaulting on their debts, and these were loans that nobody could actually ever pay off. They were insanely predatory loans.
So what David argues, if you just gave the people the money to actually pay them.
Well, if we just paid off the mortgages, now you have people with houses, and the banks are owed the mortgages that they're owed. Therefore, they would not fail. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We have this...
How quickly we forget this.
One of his big arguments, and he cites the Jubilee of this, and classical debt cancellations that kings used to do over their lands during the Middle Ages, was this idea that, okay, so both the creditor and the debtor can both be immoral. And it depends entirely on the situation.
But wouldn't canceling everyone's debt, wouldn't that increase inflation?
So this is where I feel like they don't fully address it. We now also have such a consumeristic society.
Sure.
Where we don't have a game plan tomorrow.
Horrible.
Our values are horrible. Like, we don't have a game plan.
If you cancel people's debt, they will accrue a pretty substantial amount of debt tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely. And this is in part personal responsibility. And as well, you have to think the marketing companies have neuroscientists developing programs to sell you stuff.
Consumer
so
neuroscience.
If we could just constantly do this, basically, the argument is overall, we are a debtor society, and it's gotten to the point where it's not working.
It's out of control.
It's out of control.
Yeah.
You know, how can
people are paying like 26% interest? Like,
how could we ever afford a home? You know what I mean? Like, it's like if I have $150,000 in the bank, let's just give a round number, and the houses where we live 5 years ago were $400,000, I would have had a substantial down payment and not that bad of a mortgage.
Yeah.
Now, the same home is nearly $900,000, $1 million.
Yeah.
You know, it's like impossible. I can't even catch up with inflation, and I'm doing things that I'm supposed to be doing correctly. And this debt then enslaves us because we need to take out this debt to even survive. And this is where it becomes immoral. And now it's such a hard conversation to say to like, oh, wipe out debts. I mean, it makes sense, but
I mean, Biden had the debt forgiveness program.
The what?
The student debt forgiveness program.
Well, that was
cancel.
What Biden did there was he took people that should have had their loans forgiven, but they were due to technicalities and because the whole student aid programs are so just corrupt. They screw people out of possibilities, and essentially what Biden did was kind of unscrewed all the people that were screwed out of it.
Isn't it true that student debt is the only debt that if you die, your family has to like take on?
I don't know if your family has to take it on, but it's a debt you cannot get out of. I know that for certain. It doesn't matter.
If you die.
Yeah, no, well, dude, that's why I said no to Columbia.
Yeah.
Like, I want to go to an Ivy League school. I want to be there. But the irony is, in a social work program,
I get the credibility, but yet I'm financially in slavery.
Well, so thinking about it, as a social work program, we're fighting oppression, but yet you are literally selling me a form of oppression.
Yeah.
And it's enticing. It's like a sweet candy. You know
like
what I mean?
It's like neuroscience, bro.
Exactly. It's an Ivy League. It's a freaking title. It's a name. Harvard, Wharton, not Wharton, Penn, UPenn. Like, it's a freaking name.
Okay, so why don't we end on some crazy freaky consumer neuroscience studies?
Tell me why I'm buying what I'm buying.
Hey, dude, this one neuroscience psych lab, I don't know where, they stuck Apple users and Android users in fMRI machines, and what they did is they basically showed them these different news stories of like negative things about Apple and negative things about Android. And the crazy thing was that in the Apple users, like dramatically more than the Android users, when the Apple users were shown negative stories about Apple as a company, in the Apple users' brains, their empathy circuits were lighting up so much more than when the Android users saw stories that said bad things about Android companies. And so what the researchers concluded was that the marketing campaigns for Apple were so strong that they were able to convince the non-conscious parts of our brains to have deep empathy for the richest company in the world, and to feel bad when people bash it. And so that's a pretty substantial accomplishment, whether it was explicit or implicit on the marketing team's part of Apple. But consumer neuroscience.
You know what I took away from this? That I need to hire Apple's marketing team
to unwire me,
to make a cult. I mean, religion, and market it to people. I mean, preach it.
Preach it. Sleight of hand.
Remember, every single that I you know what?
See, words matter, bro. Curse words. We're wrapping this around.
Yep.
Words matter, and words have
preach.
implicit. This is the reason why Donald Trump can say nothing and everything at the exact same time, because it's so vague that everyone just puts on it what they want to believe.
I wish Donald Trump would just own being the corporatist that he is.
But he doesn't need to own any, because once again, these people are entrenched in their worldview, and there's nothing stopping them. We can all have our own opinions about how people should and shouldn't react. These are how people are. And I think it's more important to just understand why they are the way they are, and then try to be as truthful and really getting to the root of why they are the way they are, instead of trying to change it.
Oh, I'm not trying to change it. I think he's hysterical. I think like, you almost have to look at it at a completely different level. Like, you can't take it seriously. You have to laugh with it.
Dude, the spaghetti monster for president 2024. Let's go.
Spaghetti. Are you spaghetti? Oh, what is that religion? Pastafarian. A Pastafarian, man. I'm telling you. No, you know what? Every time somebody asks me who I'm voting for, I say King Charles, and I start, God save the king. You know?
God save the king.
Why'd we even have a revolution?
Back.
Yeah.
Soon we'll see.
Yeah.
You'll remember how the night with me. What's the Hamilton song? It's so good. We'll be back. And then it goes, when push comes to shove.
I don't remember.
I'll kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Da 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 da. Oh gosh, it's gonna get copyrighted.
Singing Hamilton.